There comes a moment when the room you've always known feels strangely hollow, as if the air itself has shifted around you. A quiet tension rises in your chest because the conversations that once flowed now scrape against your awareness like a dull blade. You begin to sense that these interactions were built on unspoken agreements you no longer participate in, like a stage play you accidentally stepped behind. A faint internal echo whispers that you didn't choose the next thought that arises, and yet it rearranges your entire perception of the people around you. If the thought is not yours, then who is the you feeling this sudden fracture? You notice that the laughter around you sounds rehearsed, as if everyone is performing for an invisible audience they don't even realize they're serving. The unease grows because your body recognizes the artificiality faster than your mind can articulate it. The philosophical truth emerges that awakening is less about gaining new insight and more about losing the ability to pretend. A subtle echo of breath moves through you, acting like a doorway that separates authenticity from habit. If the doorway is real, why does stepping through it make familiar faces feel so distant? You start catching micro-expressions in people that you never noticed before, tiny hesitations and flickers of tension that betray the stories they're trapped inside. This recognition pulls you into a deeper discomfort because you see their masks shift, and suddenly you cannot unsee the performance they don't know they're giving. The insight is that awakening strips away the social illusions that once made compatibility effortless. Your breath becomes a quiet boundary, a thin line of awareness that refuses to collapse back into unconscious agreement. If the line is this thin, why does it feel stronger than every bond you thought you understood? There are moments when you stand in a familiar place, a kitchen, a living room, a workplace, and the entire environment feels like a staged set built around the older version of you. A tension rises because your body remembers how to belong here, but your awareness refuses to play along with the script. The realization appears that compatibility was never about personality but about shared illusions held together by mutual sleep. A faint echo of shadow moves through your perception, reminding you that you're watching patterns you once performed without question. If the shadow is simply what falls away, why does its absence make the room feel colder? You begin to see that your withdrawal is not a choice but a consequence of outgrowing the frequency that shaped your former identity. This truth feels disorienting because you didn't decide to change. The change happened beneath thought, like tectonic plates shifting without warning. The insight is that awakening reorganizes your inner architecture long before you have language to explain it. Your awareness feels like a fracture opening inward, revealing that what falls away was never truly aligned with you. If the fracture is real, what does it reveal about the version of you who believed they belonged here at all? You begin to notice that every social exchange carries an invisible script, and your awareness suddenly refuses to follow the lines. A tightness forms in your chest because you can feel yourself pulling back even as your body goes through the motions. The insight arises that once illusion is seen, the old game collapses under its own weight because it depended on your unconscious participation. A quiet inner breath becomes a threshold where you sense the old self dissolving mid-conversation. If you are no longer playing the role, then who exactly is everyone responding to? You catch yourself listening to conversations filled with complaints, competition, and subtle status moves, and they land in your awareness like echoes of a language you no longer speak. The dissonance unsettles you because the people around you still believe this language is reality. The philosophical truth emerges that awakening removes the glue that held these dynamics together, revealing the egoic machinery beneath them. A stabilizing breath gives you a momentary pause as if the room expands around your stillness. If your stillness exposes the script, why does it also make you feel like an intruder in your own life? You start realizing that gossip feels like noise rather than connection, and your nervous system reacts faster than your mind can interpret. The emotional tension comes from watching yourself refrain from participating while others dive deeper into narratives built on projection. The insight becomes clear that awakening doesn't make you better than anyone else, it simply makes you incompatible with unconscious exchanges. A subtle internal echo tells you that silence is not avoidance but self-preservation. If silence protects you, why does it also highlight how much of your identity depended on noise? You begin noticing micro-behaviors, forced smiles, strategic pauses, rhetorical questions meant to manipulate rather than connect. This recognition creates a sharp internal discomfort because you see the mechanics of the game while others still think it's spontaneous interaction. The deeper realization appears that illusion requires mutual blindness, and once your eyes adjust to truth, you can't dim them again. Your breath acts like a mirror, showing you how quickly you lose energy when you pretend not to notice what you now perceive clearly. If the mirror is showing you the cost, why did you spend so many years calling it friendship? You find yourself withdrawing even in the middle of conversations, not out of judgment but because your awareness refuses to reenact the old patterns. This withdrawal feels unsettling because it happens automatically, without your permission or conscious decision. The insight lands that awakening exposes the artificial scaffolding of social life, revealing how much of it was built on collective sleep. A shadow-like echo moves through your mind, reminding you that the game only worked when you didn't know you were playing it. If you are no longer willing to play, what happens to the relationships that required your unconsciousness to survive? You begin to feel the emotional temperature of a room before a single word is spoken, as if the air itself carries other people's unresolved tension. A subtle contraction tightens in your chest because you can sense where the energy is leaking or where someone is silently demanding attention. The insight appears that heightened awareness doesn't create new problems, it reveals the ones you were too numb to feel. A thin thread of breath becomes a boundary you didn't know you had until it vibrates under pressure. If you can feel this much now, how much were you absorbing unconsciously before? You notice you can tell the moment someone enters a space whether they bring peace or chaos, long before their behavior confirms it. A discomfort rises because this sensitivity makes ordinary interactions feel overwhelmingly dense or invasive. The philosophical realization emerges that energy speaks first and intention speaks second, and your nervous system has learned to listen. A quiet inner echo reminds you that your reaction is not overthinking but perception sharpening. If perception is this sharp, why do you still doubt the signals your body has been giving you for years? You start recognizing emotional offloading, the way someone subtly shifts their weight, sighs too loudly, or uses a certain tone that invites you to carry what isn't yours. A deeper tension builds because you can feel the transaction happening beneath the conversation, even when the words sound innocent. The insight forms that awakening strengthens your boundaries by making the invisible visible, stripping away the excuse of ignorance. A breath passes through you like a small gate closing, not out of coldness but out of clarity. If the gate must close to protect you, why did you ever let it stay open for those who only took from you? You realize some people approach you not for connection but for the emotional charge they receive when you react to their drama. This recognition creates a sudden internal rupture because you see how often you were used as a stabilizer for others' unresolved chaos. The truth becomes undeniable that your new sensitivity exposes the imbalance of relationships built on extraction rather than reciprocity. A shadowy echo of memory flickers, showing you how drained you used to feel without understanding why. If these dynamics were always there, what does it mean that you only see them now? You start to understand that what feels like pulling away is actually your awareness refusing to leak energy into patterns it no longer resonates with. This refusal feels strange because it happens instinctively, as if your inner system is enforcing rules your mind hasn't had time to articulate. The deeper insight reveals that this new sensitivity is less a gift and more a form of spiritual immunity emerging through necessity. Your breath becomes a quiet lighthouse, showing you where your energy should not go. If the body knows the truth before the mind catches up, what happens when you finally trust the signal instead of resisting it? You begin to notice that when you are deeply present, the world around you slows as if every sound, breath, and gesture becomes sharper than before. A tension forms because the people you interact with seem to be living 2 steps ahead or 3 steps behind, lost in thoughts rather than here. The insight arrives that presence is not an elevated state but the natural one, and everything else is a distraction built by the mind. A soft internal breath becomes a gateway, pulling you inward into stillness even as external noise tries to reclaim you. If you are here, fully, why does everyone else feel like they are somewhere else? When you speak to someone absorbed in their own mental noise, you feel as if you are talking to a hologram rather than a living being. Unease grows because the conversation drifts without depth, collapsing into surface-level patterns that once felt normal but now feel painfully empty. The realization appears that you are no longer connecting to their presence but to their persona, a psychological costume repeating familiar lines. A small echo of silence inside you highlights this gap like a spotlight on an empty stage. If the stage is empty, who exactly is reacting to your words? You begin to see that most people are rehearsing their identity instead of inhabiting it, performing opinions, emotions, and responses shaped by past stories. The tension comes from witnessing this performance while sensing the real person hidden behind it, unreachable until they step back into themselves. The philosophical insight unfolds that presence cannot be forced or imitated, because it is the absence of pretending. A stabilizing breath widens the space inside you, creating clarity where confusion used to live. If you can feel the mask so clearly, what happens when you stop relating to the mask at all? In everyday scenes, a cafe, a workplace, a quiet moment at home, you notice how rare it is to find someone who is actually here with you. This recognition creates a subtle ache because presence used to be something you didn't even think about, and now it defines the possibility of connection. The insight lands that loneliness is not the absence of people but the absence of presence in people. An internal echo moves through you like a slow ripple, revealing how much emptiness you used to call companionship. If being surrounded by people still feels empty, what does that say about what you truly need? A micro-practice arises naturally. Notice the exact moment your breath shifts before your mind speaks. This moment feels like a window opening inside your awareness, revealing a stillness that remains untouched by the noise around you. The insight forms that presence is the anchor that frees you, not the tether that binds you. Your breath becomes a subtle guide, showing you how quickly you leave yourself when pulled into someone else's unconscious momentum. If the breath is the doorway back to yourself, why do you keep stepping out of it for the sake of connection that doesn't nourish you? If this is hitting close to home, take a second, like the video, subscribe, and stay with me. You start noticing a sharpness in your perception, as if you see unconscious patterns in others with laser clarity. Attention rises because this same clarity turns inward and exposes your own unresolved fragments, making every flaw feel magnified. The insight emerges that awakening doesn't erase the shadow, it illuminates it so intensely that you can no longer pretend it isn't there. A faint internal echo suggests that this harshness isn't truth but a mirror of your own self-judgment. If the mirror is showing you yourself, why does it feel like everyone else is the problem? You may find yourself becoming intolerant of behaviors in others that are actually reflections of aspects you haven't accepted within. A discomfort grows because the mind reacts without your permission, projecting internal conflict outward before you even understand what triggered it. The realization appears that projection is the shadow's last defense, an attempt to externalize what you're not ready to own. A slow breath steadies the internal swirl, revealing hints of responsibility beneath the irritation. If the irritation is yours, why does it wear someone else's face? There are moments when you judge someone's unconsciousness with a severity that surprises you, as if their actions threaten the fragile structure of your emerging clarity. A deeper tension builds because part of you knows this harshness is disproportionate, yet you can't stop the impulse to withdraw. The insight forms that spiritual pride is simply ego wearing different clothing, trying to maintain control by masquerading as discernment. A subtle echo of shadow flickers, reminding you that humility is not thinking less of yourself but seeing yourself without distortion. If the distortion persists, how can you trust the conclusions you draw about others? You might catch yourself reacting strongly to a simple comment, tone, or facial expression, long before logic can justify your emotional spike. This sudden reaction creates a jarring internal contradiction because you thought awakening would make you calmer, not more reactive. The truth reveals itself as paradox. Awareness amplifies sensitivity before it stabilizes it. A quiet breath crosses through you like a small clearing in a dense forest, offering a momentary sense of direction. If the forest feels unfamiliar, how do you know whether you're lost or simply walking where you've never walked before? Eventually you begin to see that the shadow is not an enemy but a teacher, and the discomfort is evidence of something unintegrated rising to be seen. This realization carries tension because integration requires facing what you avoided, not what others triggered. The insight lands that projection fades when you stop outsourcing your unresolved emotions to the nearest available person. An internal echo softens the edges, reminding you that clarity isn't the absence of shadow but the ability to see through it. If the shadow only appears when the light increases, what does that reveal about the direction you're actually moving in? You realize that real connection feels entirely different now, almost like two fields of awareness meeting without effort. Attention rises because you sense instantly when the other person is not actually present, and the interaction collapses into hollow motion. The insight forms that connection is not created by conversation but by consciousness, and without mutual presence the words are just sound. A quiet breath becomes your internal compass, showing you when you are speaking to a mind instead of a being. If presence is the true meeting point, why does it feel so rare to find someone willing to stand in it with you? You begin noticing how exhausting it is to maintain a bond when only one person is awake inside themselves. The emotional strain grows because you can feel yourself carrying the entire weight of the interaction while the other person drifts in and out of awareness. The philosophical truth emerges that connection requires reciprocity not of effort, but of attention. A stabilizing echo reminds you that loneliness inside a conversation is more painful than being alone. If attention is the real currency, why are so few people willing to spend it? You start observing micro moments, someone checking their phone, interrupting, drifting into memory, that reveal they are not truly with you. A deeper tension surfaces because you can feel the exact moment the connection breaks, even if they continue speaking. The insight appears that presence cannot coexist with distraction, and distraction is the default mode of most minds. A soft breath traces the boundary between your awareness and their absence, revealing how quickly energy drains when you try to bridge the gap alone. If you can feel the absence this clearly, what happens when you stop compensating for it? You see that most connections you once called intimate were actually formed between personas, habits, or shared narratives, not between two present beings. This realization stings because it reframes the entire architecture of your past relationships. The clarity emerges that depth cannot grow where authenticity is not allowed to breathe. A subtle inner echo reminds you of how often you minimized your needs just to maintain harmony in spaces where you were not truly seen. If harmony required your disappearance, was it ever real connection at all? You begin to understand that genuine presence creates an entirely different relational ecosystem, slower, quieter, deeper, and not everyone is willing to meet you there. This truth brings tension because it forces you to accept that some relationships will fade simply because only one of you evolved into awareness. The insight lands that real connection is not about quantity but resonance, and one conscious exchange can nourish more than years of unconscious interaction. A breath of clarity widens inside you, revealing a new standard you cannot unlearn. If this new standard is your baseline now, who remains when you stop lowering it? You begin to notice that the things you once chased now feel strangely hollow, as if their meaning evaporated the moment you stopped needing them. Attention rises because your old motivations no longer activate, leaving you suspended between who you were and who you're becoming. The insight appears that desire shifts when consciousness shifts, revealing how much of your past was driven by unconscious imitation. A faint inner echo reminds you that what excited you before was often a distraction rather than a calling. If excitement fades when illusion fades, what remains to guide you forward? You watch yourself lose interest in conversations, habits, and environments that once defined your identity, and the loss feels both liberating and disorienting. A deeper tension grows because part of you wants the comfort of familiarity even as another part refuses to return to it. The realization emerges that awakening doesn't add new layers, it strips away the inauthentic ones until only truth is left. A quiet breath settles inside you like a calm ocean after a storm, giving you a glimpse of how different life feels without compulsions. If the storm has stopped, why do you still wait for waves that no longer come? You start to feel resistance when engaging in activities that once brought pleasure, small talk, gossip, noise, because your body reacts before your mind can justify the shift. This resistance creates internal conflict because you worry that you are becoming difficult, when in truth you are becoming honest. The insight lands that preferences born from ego naturally dissolve when awareness expands beyond them. A subtle echo of shadow reminds you that letting go is not rejection but recalibration. If recalibration is natural, why does it feel like losing parts of yourself you were never meant to keep? You notice that your motivations transform from external validation to internal alignment, and this shift destabilizes relationships built on old expectations. The tension intensifies because people may interpret your change as withdrawal, arrogance, or disinterest when it is actually evolution. The philosophical truth emerges that awakening changes not what you do but why you do it, and intention reshapes the entire fabric of your choices. A stabilizing breath reveals how often you acted out of fear, obligation, or habit instead of resonance. If intention is the foundation, what happens to the structures built on motives you no longer recognize? You realize that your new desires pull you toward depth, silence, truth, and presence, and this creates an inner rupture with the world you once easily navigated. This rupture feels like a split in your identity because the old version of you would have accepted far less than the clarity you now require. The insight appears that transformation is not addition but subtraction, and what falls away exposes what was always essential. A quiet breath becomes the line between your past and your emerging self, marking a shift you cannot reverse. If the emergence has already begun, who are you becoming now that you no longer feed what once defined you? You begin to feel an unmistakable pull inward, as if your inner world is asking for silence the way a wound asks for clean air. Solitude starts to feel less como uma fuga and more like a necessary reset, a place where your nervous system can finally stop performing. You notice that the people who once filled your days now feel energetically heavy, and being around them drains you faster than you can recover. Slowly, you realize this isn't rejection of others but a recalibration of yourself, a bridge between the self that survived through noise and the one that can only emerge in quiet. If this bridge feels unfamiliar, could it be because you've rarely stood on your own side of it? In small, ordinary moments, waking up alone, sitting at a quiet table, walking without your phone, you feel a different kind of presence settling into your body. The silence that once felt threatening now starts to feel fertile, as if clarity only grows where other people's expectations aren't drowning you. You begin to see that loneliness was often just the absence of distraction, not the absence of connection with yourself. In this space, you meet the parts of you that never had room to breathe while you were busy belonging everywhere else. If this is who you are when no one is watching, what does it say about the life you built for the version of you that was never really home? You begin noticing that the drama swirling around you no longer pulls you into its center the way it used to. Conversations that once hijacked your emotions now pass through like weather, and part of you waits for the old reaction that never fully arrives. You realize that this isn't numbness but a new kind of clarity, a quiet gravity that keeps you from spinning in other people's storms. presence stops working like a sponge and starts working like a shield, revealing what was never yours to carry in the first place. If the storm keeps moving while you remain anchored, was it ever really about you? Old triggers still appear, but now you see them as shadows on the wall instead of threats in the room. The hook that used to grab you loses its grip, and relationships built on unconscious patterns subtly begin to rearrange themselves around your new center. Some connections fade without a fight, others deepen because they no longer have to compete with chaos to survive. You start to understand that this spiritual immunity isn't defense, it's non-attachment, compassion without self-erasure. If your center is finally self-authored, what kind of connection can grow from a place that no longer needs to be rescued or validated? You start seeing your relationships not as fixed roles but as living ecosystems that respond directly to your state of consciousness. As you shift, certain bonds naturally loosen while others grow roots you didn't know were possible. You notice that shared history alone is no longer enough to hold things together when resonance is missing. Life quietly edits your social world without asking permission, revealing who can meet you where you stand now instead of where you used to be. If the edit feels ruthless, is it possible that it's also honest? At the same time, new people begin to appear with a different frequency, more present, more sincere, more willing to exist without the mask. You realize that awakening doesn't isolate you. It filters your field so that performance falls away and only what is real can remain. One genuine, conscious connection starts to feel more nourishing than a room full of people who can't truly see you. Your relational world reorganizes around depth instead of habit, presence instead of persona, resonance instead of fear. If these are the connections that survive this shift, what kind of life are they quietly inviting you to step into? Awakening doesn't take people from you, it takes the versions of you that needed unconsciousness to stay attached to them. It shows you that what you called pulling away was actually your awareness pulling you back to yourself, so your relationships could finally be built on truth instead of survival. Now you stand in the quiet space between who you were and who you're becoming, watching your world reorganize itself around presence, resonance, and honesty. If something in you recognizes this shift, then maybe it's not the end of connection at all, but the first time you've ever been truly available for the kind of connection you were always meant to have.